inquest jury gave to the 55 questions.
Is that directed at me?
Yes, at you.
Okay. I'm Andre Taylor, AndreTaylor. My reaction is a mixed reaction. I see optimism in some of the things that the jury brought forth. I see particularly three things that stand out to me. I see officers, the jury felt that the officers did not identify themselves. I see 30 to 31 officers asking for compliance. I see a number 33 and 34 that my brother complied. I also see that in 46 and 47 that no officer seen a gun after the shooting. Those are things that give you hope to continue to fight another day. So I think that it's fortunate, as James Bible and I have spoken, that we have cameras today. Because had there not been cameras today, we probably wouldn't be here. It's a blessing to be in a time and age that at least things could be shown instead of said out of our communities that we've been saying for hundreds of years that there are instances that we face that we haven't had any justice.
They
I
also
would add to that if I might.
Yes, sir.
It's apparent that in this circumstance, having reviewed all of the information, 1,900 pages, having reviewed videos, countless videos, listened to the audio, having it slowed down, that ultimately Mr. Taylor was killed for compliance. I say that because based on the interrogatories that we've seen, it's apparent that when hands were told to go up, those hands went up. When a body was told to get down, a body went down, not prior to being told to get down. And if Mr. Taylor had simply stood there and not moved with his hands up, he might have gotten beaten down, but they wouldn't have the opportunity to say that he was reaching for a weapon that nobody saw in his hand later. They just saw an arm or a shoulder movement is their claim. The interrogatories are remarkable because I've never really been in a space in this sort of case where the jury unanimously made the decision that a second officer actually didn't see what he claimed to see on the witness stand, didn't see that movement being made. So ultimately, we can't forget that it's possible to create your own fear. And in this case, their own fear was created by their own directions. Mr. Taylor was shot for compliance. It's not about whether or not he should have been arrested. That would have been for something else. That would have been for a different courtroom. It ultimately is about whether or not we can trust that officers will exercise the role that they're supposed to exercise in the safest way possible for all human beings. And then ultimately be in a space where they utilize their training to such a degree that they assure that everybody is safe, including somebody that they are suspecting of a crime. And that is the biggest failure here. But thankfully, that failure is actually illustrated in some of the jurors' responses. And we can't pretend that the video doesn't matter, because it does. 3 years ago, or a little over 3 years ago now, I sat with a father whose son was killed by a police officer. That son was killed by a police officer named Spalding, the same officer. And at that time, I was deeply heartbroken because I told him that there was nothing I could do. I told him there was nothing I could do because I didn't have any of the other sort of physical evidence that might be important, or any video, because there was none. So what we were left with was the officer's narrative and nothing more. And if we had the officer's narrative and nothing more in this case, these interrogatories here, not all of them would look the same. They wouldn't be in a space where they'd say, oh wow, Shay Taylor was actually complying. Oh wow, Shay Taylor was actually going down. They wouldn't be in that space. They would be 8-0 in the wrong direction every time. And remarkably, these undercover officers, the jurors found, they really weren't identifying themselves as police officers even. So you have undercover officers running at you with long guns and rifles, and you still end up complying. What would that narrative be if there were no video? What would this inquest look like if there were no video?
They also said that they were afraid for their lives.
Exactly, you can create your own fear. If I tell somebody to do something and then they do it and it's frightening to me because it looks like something different than what it actually is, I've done that. They controlled that moment. Sure, absolutely. There are, I think, over 90 interrogatories that we actually requested. We got 50 some. And what we wanted to do was address exactly that sort of issue, because one of the questions that they never got to answer was, did the officers create their own fear based on their instruction? And that matters. And there are some places in this nation where you could actually get charged with a crime as an officer for instructing somebody to do something, they do it, and then you shoot them. It's happened in the state of California.
What is your next step? Mr. Taylor was saying that he's hopeful and that this is only just begun. So what will you do next?
Well, I don't want to show my whole hand. The family doesn't want to show our whole hand, but there's a few things that we we're going to keep fighting for sure. There's a few things that we haven't that we've discussed with people as we go forward, and I'm sure that you will be the first ones to hear about it sometime real soon.
Suing the city, perhaps?
Well, we'll see what happens. We still want to give the prosecutor's office an opportunity to see the possibility of some criminal liability. So we want to wait till that process happens. I know this goes to the prosecutor's office after this, so there's still that chance.
That they will charge the officers?
That something can happen. So I don't want to give up on that.
Are you hopeful that that'll happen?
Well, of course I'm hopeful that it happens, but it's an avenue. You have to let the process play out. If that doesn't play out, we continue to move forward as we have done for 1 year up to this date. So.
What charge would you like to see?
Well, that's kind of difficult for me to say. What we believe will be a charge that the prosecutors would accept and go forward with. I just want to see some type of accountability. And I don't know what that looks like, But if they start and say, well, we see something here that we think these officers need to be accountable for, then our family will assess that and move forward when that time comes, if it comes.
Well, the police chief could also do something, could you not?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'm saying, are you appealing to her as well, or?
We're appealing to anybody that believes in justice, that sit here and
Yes.
went through this process and understands that this jury have seen some things that should trouble every American. Every American.
As the family, as a person that's an activist in this community, we represent what we believe is that this was premeditated murder. We've always believed that. But you're also asking us to have faith in a process that has never been favorable to the victims. The history of, the outcomes of inquest hearings is that it's always favorable to law enforcement. And even in this case, the jury came back and said that they believed that Shay was compliant. They believed that the officers did not identify themselves. They believed that there was no handgun. So all of those things give me hope as well, make me more optimistic as well, that could restore our faith in these inquest hearings that have never resulted in having any favor for victims. And in this case, it does just kind of show that it's not justified, but just showing that we can still have hope in this process.
You would like them charged with murder then?
I would like them charged. I would like them charged and convicted. I want them sentenced.
Yes.
With murder or something else?
Murder.
Murder.
They assassinated him. And they never feared for their life. They didn't even give him a chance to do anything. They come to kill him.
Your
They-
name?
Joyce Dorsey, I'm his mother.
Spell your last name for us.
Dorsey. And I have always said that he complied. He's conditioned to comply. He is not suicidal. You would have to be suicidal not to try to get down on the ground when all them weapons, rifles, was pointed at you.
Always.
There were 4 officers charging at him with different commands, telling him to put his hands up, but to get down on the ground, and he complied with those orders. And the jury believed that he complied with those orders.
How do you have a gun in a holster and you don't have a fingerprint or a DNA or none of it? He had to put the gun in the holster that day.
It's also remarkable that they had the perception that Mr. Taylor complied, given that 4-4, they had some confusion over whether or not the officers were yelling conflicting instructions at the same time. As you review the interrogatories, you will find that 4-4, 4 believed they were yelling separate instructions back and forth, show us your hands, get on the ground, and 4 believed that they were overlapping instructions, show us your hands, get on the ground. An untenable sort of situation was created. It was hasty, it was rash, and it was unprofessional. And I think that that's a reality that needs to be addressed perhaps with the chief or somebody else, because this sort of activity, this sort of policing is not what we want in our name as citizens of Seattle and people that live here in this county and the state of Washington. It's a disappointment and an absolute failure. I think that we can't pretend that policing on that day in relation to Shay Taylor was good. And the reality is that Shay Taylor had been brought into custody before in his life and had never been in a spot where he didn't comply with an officer's commands. And they knew that. And one of the things that the jury that I just had getting past in this case is that the jury didn't get to know that that gun that they said was Shay Taylor's was actually purchased by a King County Sheriff's officer, and there's no, or a former King County Sheriff's officer, and there's no indication that that was actually Shay Taylor's gun. There's more indication that that was a police officer's gun. And we've seen what happened back east with the drop gun, and that'll always be a question that's present here. That should have been in front of the jury for them